Well, David Frondarina, it's a pleasure to have you join me on set today, and I look forward to hearing your story. How are you feeling today?
Feeling good. I'm feeling good. I'm excited to be here.
You know, you were telling me a story of what happened while your wife took over the last hour of the drive. Tell me that again, because that's something that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. We were like down to the last 60 miles, and I asked Kylie, I was like, can you just get us the rest of the way? I'm a little tired. And she's driving, and we're on the freeway, and next thing I know, she's braking really hard, and two cars in front of us are kind of, swerving, and we noticed that a little dog had rolled out, and the car in front of us hit it, and it deflected. But there was a car pulled off to the shoulder, and this man was just like this out the window, like with his jaw dropped, like. And I think his dog jumped out the car and ran into the middle of the freeway, and he just saw it get ping-ponged around. It was
only you experience some of the craziest things that I've heard in life, and here you are coming to the set. You're coming to hang out, to fellowship, and of course to share your story, and you pick up another story. I know it sounds probably a little sadistic to people that we're kind of laughing about it. It's not necessarily that we're laughing. It's really the shock of a thing.
Yeah.
Because that's the unexpected. When your wife shared the story with me, she said, "Rob, I think he jumped out the window." And I said, either that or he braked or something and he fell out, and he just kind of got ping-ponged around. I'll never forget, there was a time where my nephew said to me, "Hey, Uncle Bob, let's go fishing." I should have known. Every time he said, "Let's go fishing." It's like December 23rd, 24th. Nobody's fishing at the time, but he was just aching to fish. He wanted to hang out and fellowship, and we roll out, and on the way, I see a fox running in the field, and I was like, "Man, that fox is flying." And I said to him, "You see that?" And he goes, "Yeah." Before I knew it, he came under like a little ramp, and he was in front of me on the road. I'm going about 70 on this back road to get to where we're going to go fish, and this fox bounces right off my car. Boom. Man, he spins around, and I'm looking for him, and he keeps running. The adrenaline on that thing kept him alive for a moment. I am sure we were looking for him to fall over on the side. We didn't see him, but I'm sure his fate was sealed. I mean, getting hit at that speed. We go fishing, and man, that was probably the biggest mistake. My nephew, he has me roll up, and he says, "This is where I park." On the far left, there's a sign that says no parking. On the far right, there's a sign that says no parking. But right in this middle slot, there is no signs. Mm-hmm. And so my nephew's like, "I park right here." And I'm like, if it says no parking there and it says no parking here,
right?
I think it means there's no parking there at all. Right. And he's like, "Nope." And I said, "All right, I'm going to trust you." So I trust him, and we go in, we park the car, we go fishing. You're not expecting Fish and Game to be out at that time, on that day, so close to the holidays. So we pull up, we walk into this aqueduct area, and there is a sign that's about this high, and it says, "No trespassing." Well, you don't see it because you're not looking for it.
Yeah.
You're looking for a sign. You're looking for it to be well posted. You're looking for it to be lifted up. It's on this small gate. And so we, of course, walk right over it. My nephew loads up his pole, and he's casting, he's fishing. And I decide I'm just going to sit here and chill for a moment. And I get on my phone, and I'm answering text. And guess who walks up but Fish and Game?
Fish and Game.
Fish and Game has more authority than, Highway Patrol. Fish and Games are like one of the highest ranking officials in the land.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I found out real quick. And so here we are. I'm answering a text, and so I'm not fishing. My nephew's fishing, and up walks the Fish and Game guy, and he goes, "Hey, is this your car?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "It says no parking over there. It says no parking over here. What do you think it means?" I said, "I don't know. It says no parking there, no parking here, but right here it doesn't say." He goes, "I think somebody removed the sign." He said, "I'm going to let you go." I was like, "Cool."
Yeah, favor.
And he goes, "But I'm going to go ahead and give you a ticket." I said, a ticket for what? I'm not fishing. And he goes, no, but you see this sign? And he points it out, and it's down on the floor.
The trespassing.
He says, you're trespassing. I said, how about cutting me a break? I could jump over this fence and we'll be good. He goes, I already gave you a break. And so he wrote me a ticket for $450 for trespassing.
Oh, man.
My nephew got one for trespassing and fishing without a license. I was like, man, don't ever invite me fishing.
Again.
So that's one of my car stories. I was just like, man, why did I listen to you? Why did I listen?
I was looking for the prophetic sign, and I was like, maybe I wasn't supposed to come and share or something. And then all I could think about is, man, I got to pray for this guy, because he's probably got to go home to his wife and be like, you know, your dog
jumped out of the car.
Man, no.
On the freeway.
And honestly, that's the whole time what I was thinking, that as his face was just hanging out his window, like.
That's
and
disbelief.
I was like, man, he's probably thinking, like, what am I going to tell my wife, man?
Anyways, enough about our crazy stories. But I wanted to talk to you really about your journey. I know at a very young age, you got diagnosed being bipolar. But even before that, you shared a story with me that really captivated me. And you talked about the journey to life and how at a very young age, at your birth, you experience a trauma, and you've been working your way through it, but you didn't know it till later in life. You know, can you just elaborate a little bit on what happened at your birth?
Well, I found out that at birth, my mom said that after she had given birth to me, that she was really tired and medicated, and she had dozed off, and that in that time the nurses had taken me from my mom to get me cleaned up, but they lost me. And so for hours, they lost me. And so then I guess it took them a while to find me, but I was found underneath a bunch of bedding sheets and stuff. And so, my mom had this fear that I was being taken. And so, at a very young age, that's kind of how things started for me. But I was born on December 22nd, and my mom said after they found me, she wouldn't let me out of her sight. And so I came home on December 24th on Christmas Eve in a Christmas stocking. And so, they brought me home in a Christmas stocking. So I was a gift. I was my mom's Christmas gift in 1976.
Man. And so from there, you know, I know that you grew up, you tell me that you grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. And while you were growing up, you experienced so many different things as a child, and you've overcome so many different things in your life. But one of the things that you share is the trauma that you experienced at a young age. I believe that there's many people that are going to relate to your story. You know, as a young man, your older brother shared information that you didn't know, and it really began to transform your life. Can you tell me about the first experience of understanding how words can influence your life?
Yeah, at a very young age, I remember we lived in government housing. We lived in low-income housing, and I was there with just my mom and my older brother at the time. And in that time, I guess my dad had left when I was about 9 months old. And so in between that, right after that, my mom had started dating my younger brother's dad, whom I thought was my biological father, because he was in my life at such a young age. And he was really good to me. He would play with us and take us to do things. And but he was a serial convict. He was a criminal by nature and just a violent man. And so, growing up with a man like that, I remember my earliest memory was my mom had let him babysit me for a few hours, and it was summertime. It was over like I think 106 degrees or something, but it was really hot. And he had taken me to his friend's house in the garage, and they had nothing to drink except beer in a cooler. And so my earliest memory is he brought me home drunk, because I had like 2 or 3 beers at like 3 years old, and my mom and him went at it. But yeah, after that, the following year, right around 4 years old, my earliest memory is my older brother leaning down from the top bunk, and he said to me, he says, "Hey David, you know Carl's not our dad, right?" something shifted then. I think that's my earliest memory of something shifting, because I was always a joyful kid. I was always one who liked to laugh. But I lost that for a long time, I think, because in that moment, what had shifted is every time the man who I thought was my father would talk to me, my response to him was, "You're not my dad." And so at a very young age, it was like I could feel like just this covering being removed, and moving into a place of orphanage, and feeling like I don't belong somewhere, or that I don't come from somewhere. And so I think at that age,
I think really, if I think about it, you know, you have a father, but he obviously isn't there at your birth. You're taken, you're hidden, and it seems like somebody's trying to steal you. So from a very young age, there is an assignment against your life, because the call on your life is going to be great. And so the assignment against you at a very young age seems to be very treacherous. It seems to be not only trying to take you, but also abandoning and forsaking you. So you're growing up feeling very abandoned, would you say?
absolutely. And I think in that feeling, it caused me to be very bitter and angry. And so, you know, growing up, what I was able to my life really was, you know, my I want to call him my stepfather, but my mom was never married to him. But the man who I thought was my dad, when my brother started school, my older brother, he was started school at 5. I was about 3.5, and my mom's boyfriend was very abusive, so he would beat my mom like a UFC fight. And so my earliest memories are being locked into a corner watching my mom be in a UFC fight and be at the losing end of that. And I remember, like, you know, sometimes my mom would yell to go to the neighbor, call the police. So the police were at my house a lot. But I think in watching that, it created such a feeling and emotion inside myself where, as I got older into young adulthood, I couldn't be in situations that I couldn't fight my way out of. And so I was always one who was prone to violence and fighting.
Well, because you witnessed it, because you watched it, then you grew to a place where you had to learn to not only defend yourself, but then you probably became a defender of others. You know, you shared with me just a moment ago something that I had no idea of, your earliest recollection of a fight.
Yeah, my first fight was, I think, about 4.5. And I think
you in
maybe
school?
that's why I hadn't even started school yet. It was right before kindergarten. And I think because my mom had experienced what she did, my biological father was also very abusive to my mom. And so I think in that she taught us to fight. And so even as I got older, you know, when me and my older brother had an argument or whatever, my mom would just be like, go outside and handle it like men. And so, but yeah, I think at my earliest fight was probably 4.5, and my mom just taught me to always punch right in the nose. And so, yeah, I hit this kid a few times, and he'd go home, clean up his nose, come back, punched him again. He'd go home, come back, and that happened like 4 or 5 times till finally he didn't come back. And what ended up happening is his dad came to my house, and I think once they saw the size difference between me and the older kid, he kind of felt bad because I was just a smaller kid. But
Yeah, so violence became maybe a medicine for you, a form of medication.
Honestly, I think for me it really came to be like an outlet for me.
Yeah.
Any time I had the feeling of wanting to be engaged in combat, it was always with the feeling of I got to get stuff off my chest.
Or do you think it was maybe when you felt like you were backed in a corner? You know, maybe something, life's difficulty kind of try to put you in a corner, and the only thing you knew is how to fight your way out.
Yeah, I think that's always been my posture is to be one who's not going to crumble or come back to that place as a little kid where all you could be is in a corner and watch. I had to feel like I could do something. And so from a very young age, living in project housing and living in poverty, I think just these things kind of took me in a direction that nobody thought my life would go. I was always a good student. I was hair parted to the side. I was always clean cut. Never wanted to have tattoos and stuff like that. But when life hit me and fatherlessness hit me, it just took me in a whole different direction like that.
Man, so your whole life's journey has been about struggle and achieve. But it hasn't come easy. It's always come with you working through different conflicts. Always, at least for me, I notice everything that I achieved because I've been through conflict. I'm the youngest of 7, and I have 2 older brothers, and they never made life easy for me. They never, we used to play a game called Sam Bam Cunningham, and they used to give me a sock football, and my 2 older brothers, my brother Ted's 5 years, my brother Rudy's 8 years older than me. So size and strength, I was always at a disadvantage. I, like you, was the smaller of my brethren. And they used to hand me this sock ball and put a little plastic helmet on me and say, dive into the end zone like Sam Bam Cunningham. And they would take these giant pillows. One would hit me on the head, the other would hit me from the feet, one from behind, one on the head, and they would make me do flips. They would smash me with these pillows until I would cry, and they would say, Sam Bam Cunningham doesn't cry. And they'd get me, and so they'd slap me around, and they'd like, do it again. And then all they had to do was go, ready, set. And then it was like this mode came on me. So they trained me literally how to fight my way out. My brother Ted was really, really cold-blooded, easiest way to say it. I think, my twin sister and I, we kind of came and replaced him as the baby, 5 years after being the baby. So I think he grew up with a little resentment, needless to say. And I'll never forget that dude, he was hard on me. And I guess I was bugging him and my cousin, so they decided to hold me upside down by my feet and put my head in a toilet bowl and swirling me. And I was like, I think about the way we played back then, and I think a generation today don't get this. We're Generation X, and so we were trained a little different. Yeah. Society was different. And so the way that people handled issues was a lot different than how we handle them today. And growing up, I think it made a fighter out of me as well. It's made me one that can endure and go through many different things, but not quit. I think what my brothers deposited in me is this, I'm gonna make it mentality. I don't care what comes against me. I have the power to overcome. When I hear your testimony and hear your story, I see a lot of that in you. And as your life begins to progress, I know that you have many sports that you fall in love with. I've happened to be at your house when the World Cup comes on. And when World Cup soccer comes, you have this motto that I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to watch every game. Where did your passion for soccer come alive in the midst of your craziness? Growing up in the projects, living in a house full of...
There was only 1 year that I ever got to play sports with my older brother, and it was the first time I got introduced to soccer. And so it was the one time that I was able to be on the same team with my brother. And in that, I found a sport that I really loved and kind of shined in. But because we were so poor, my mom had 2 other kids after me. So she was a single mom on welfare with 4 boys. And so what she would do, because we didn't have money to do anything, is she would take us one of 2 places. On the weekends, sometimes she would take us to the drive-in, because you could get a whole carload of us into a movie for $5. And then I think it was like $1.50 for nachos. So my mom could literally take us to the movies for like $7 and us have nachos and watch a couple of movies at the drive-in. But the other thing she would do is she would take us to the park in La Puente, where I'm from, and she would allow us to play soccer, but we would play with older men. And I was only like 5 or 6 at the time, but I just loved the game, and so we would play. But what would end up happening every time we play is these older men would take me out, because I'd be dribbling, and I was really fast with the ball, and I could dribble nice. And so over time, like as you start dancing around men, what they end up doing is taking you out. And so I'd come off the sidelines crying, hurt. And my mom would just be like, well, your choice is play or don't play. But if you want to play, this is how they play. And so she taught me at an early age that if you're going to play the game you love with older men, you're going to have to be willing to take the punches. And so that's really what sparked my love for the game is I wasn't going to be pushed around and pushed out of a game I love. I was going to continue.
So how many years did you end up playing soccer?
I played my whole life. So all the way up into adulthood, I played club most of my life, travel ball. By the time I had played club for many, many years, I came to professional coaching and stuff like that. And so then I played college for a couple years. And then I went from that to doing like adult leagues and stuff like that after. But yeah, I've pretty much played my whole life. So
soccer was probably an outlet, place to burn energy, place to excel, a place to shine. I know that there was a time where you thought, I really want to go after this. And what happened on that journey?
It was in right before high school. When what ended up happening was we had my older brother had a friend move in and to the house. And I mean, if I go back a little bit further, when we moved out of the housing we were in, my grandparents, the reason why we did is my grandparents got tired of my mom being abused, and they came to the house one day and they told my mom to pack all your things, and me and my older brother came to live with my grandparents. And that was probably the best thing because my grandparents lived in a nice area, and I find that we didn't have a lot, but I had a roof over my head without violence. And so that in itself was a big time upgrade.
I love what you just said. I had a roof over my head without violence. So for the very first time in your life, you're how old?
I moved there when I was 5.5.
And at 5.5, you're recognizing I'm in a house where there's no violence.
Yeah, I didn't have a bed. I didn't have material things. I didn't even own a bed till I was like almost 20 years old. I got my first bed. But yeah, we didn't have, we grew up on government cheese and whatever food stamps can buy. But yeah, I mean, prior to that, I just, I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember like peaceful nights. I don't remember things like that. I just remember at the house, like there was a lot of things in project housing that happened that most people don't understand. There's a lot of sex predators. There's a lot of, a lot of violence with various offending. I mean, different types of people who do different types of crimes. So it's just a different atmosphere than what my grandparents pulled us into. But once my grandparents pulled us into their home, I shared a room with all three of my brothers. So, it was all four of us in one room, my mom and another. But yeah, when your mom's on welfare and struggling and there's no man in her life and she's at her parents' house, I'll just say depression at its biggest was probably the biggest thing I fought. It was all in my family at that time, and so that was the hardest thing.
So how do you think you coped with this, this cloud, this weight, this oppression, this depression that's sitting on your house? How as a young man did you cope with it?
It's crazy because out of my brothers, I was, I think, the problem child. Out of all four of us, I was the one that
Not
got
you.
spanked the most. I mean, like if out of all the spankings my mom gave, I think probably 90% of them came my way.
I tell everybody that growing up, I was spanked probably every day from 7 or 8 till about 12. Wow. I don't think there was a day that was missed. My dad, was a very strong disciplinarian. I grew up in a generation where if my neighbor friends acted up at our house, my dad would spank them.
Yeah, that's how my mom was.
Yeah, man, it was like equal opportunity. Anybody could get spanked. You're at my house, you're one of the kids, get in line, And that's why probably none of my friends want to stay at my house.
I remember I got my first friend, I played Little League with, he was a white dude, and he came to my house, and yeah, my mom spanked him one time, and he was just tripping.
The other day, me and Juanita were walking down the street, and this little boy, his mom walked him out, and he broke his hand away from her, and he ran up the street, and she started counting 1, 2, and she calls out his name. I won't say it. She calls out his name. I'll say it. Michael! 1, 2. The kid's halfway up the block. My wife looked at me and goes, she ain't Mexican. That's all. When she said that, I was like, I know exactly what you're thinking.
Yep.
It was a whole different time.
Yeah.
And, generations have changed. And, so anyways, just hearing that counting.
It was definitely a culture shock going from where I was to the city where my grandparents lived in, because it always caused me to observe. Like, I was always watching my friends and their families and their parents and their houses, and it was just so different than my house. And I think, like, when you grow up with a mother who's really been through the ringer and battles with depression and things like that, like, you really begin to understand through discipline that, hey, my mom's taking other stuff out on me. Like, she's not hitting me because she loves me. She's hitting me because she's got things, frustration, and I pushed her to the limit, and now she has an outlet. And I remember at that time, like, I didn't want to be broken. And so I remember I hit an age where I would just look at my mom straight in the face and just be like, do it. Like, do what you got to do. And she would just lash me, and I would keep my face as still as I could and just to tell her, are you done? And she would continue to hit me until I broke. And so in trying to make a point to her, like, you wouldn't break me, she would just hit me till I broke, and eventually I would break. And then once I started to break, then she would stop hitting me. But I remember in that season, that's when I first heard this name of this man named Jesus, because we never went to church. I don't even think I seen a Bible until I was an adult. My grandparents were Catholic, but we never, I think I went to church with them one time for the free donut they give you before. But I remember just sitting in there and not understanding anything because the language used, it was more like old King James type, but I had never been to a church or I had never seen a Bible. I had never prayed or been introduced to the Word of God. But the way I got introduced to Jesus was when my mom, my mom would be in her room and she would lock herself in her room, and you could just hear my mom cry and weep. And in being outside of the door, I would just listen, and I could hear my mom say, Lord, just take me. Lord, just take me. And I remembered that when I got introduced to the healing room, because all of a sudden Holy Spirit jogged my memory back to that time, because what I would do is I would put my hand on the door and I would say, give me her pain, I could take it. Mm. And I didn't remember that until I got introduced to the healing room for the first time, and this man said, he said, David, God has given you a gift of healing, a healing gift. And right away, my memory went back to then, and that was what I was asking. I was like, I could take her pain, to a God I had never been introduced to, a God I had never known. Just hearing my mom cry, Lord, take me. I spoke to that man who never showed up, and that was how I got introduced to God. And kind of crazy though, because even after that, as I grew up and I got diagnosed with bipolarism, my mom would be like, you need to be on medication. Like, there's something wrong with you. You got a chemical imbalance. And at the time, because I didn't know God, but I had heard of him, I would tell her, there's nothing wrong with me that God can't fix.
And you don't even really know the Lord.
I was saying it to be cheeky. I was saying it to be, to be quite honest, because I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him, but I was saying it to be a smart butt, you know what I mean? And my mom knew it. And so...
Not you.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I got, that was my first taste of the things of God was like that.
Wow. How did bipolarism affect you?
It really, it affected me in a way that it took my life in a whole different direction from someone that I never thought I would be and do things that I never thought I would do.
So what are some of the things that you thought you would never do that you found yourself caught up in?
I was never one to do drugs or to have tattoos or I was a good student. I was almost a straight A student. I was always very scholastic. Things like that came easy to me. I was always an overachiever. I was very artistic. My nana was an artist, and that was one of the things that she had taught me how to do early on, was to draw and paint.
One of the things that I saw, at the church that you help pastor and you share the word at, is watching you do your penmanship on the glass. It always amazes me at how legible your lettering is. I look at you and I don't see you. I wouldn't automatically assume, God, this guy has pristine penmanship. But when I see you write, and put up the weekly schedule, that thing is like perfect. And I had no idea that you had that skill until one day I saw you painting on the window. And I was like, when did you learn how to do this? And you're like, when I was young.
Writing on all the things you shouldn't be writing on. But honestly, the reason why was my older brother always had beautiful penmanship. But as I played soccer throughout my years, I remember, I feel like this is at least my own experience. At a very young age, there was a still small voice in me that had told me that I would be somebody. And the only person I've ever told that to was my wife. But something inside me, now I could tell you it was Holy Spirit. But then it was just this small voice that was like one day. And so as life got to be harder and then got worse and worse and worse, I would tell myself things like I'm getting the bad days over with right now. Life's gonna be good because one day. And so I remember one day I was in during the Rodney King trial, I was in Simi Valley for a soccer tournament. And there was a man by the name of Kobe Jones who was a professional soccer player who had just come out of UCLA and made the U.S. national team. And for the winners of the tournament, he was presenting the trophies and stuff. And the team I was on was a gold bracket team and the best in the country. And so every tournament we went to, we won. And so when I remember they give you these tournament pamphlets, the booklets, and I remember being presented with our trophies, and Kobe Jones was signing all of our pamphlets. And I remember I grabbed his pamphlet as he was signing, giving me his autograph. I grabbed his pamphlet, and I signed my name with my number 4. And I was like, save this, you're gonna need this. And so I had practiced my autograph so many times as a young kid that my penmanship just began to be like a stamp almost. And It was simply from practicing my autograph because I thought I was going to be a somebody in soccer.
A professional soccer player of some sort.
That's what I thought.
Olympic gold.
Yeah. And honestly, because of the path that I fell into, I would have gone to college with soccer easily, but because I had gotten involved in drugs and with the wrong crowd, I got kicked out of school my sophomore year. And so when they did my GPA verification to transfer to college out of high school, I was missing a whole semester. And so in that, it brought my GPA down significantly to where no colleges would even consider me. And so I ended up going to a community college. I went to Mount Sackford for a couple years and played there.
Man, so you talked about how your life in high school began to shift. You said you started doing things you wouldn't normally have done. When did drugs become a part of your life?
Yeah, I think it led up to there subtly in a way that I probably didn't recognize in hindsight now as I look at it. What happened was I began to get very envious of my friends and the lives that they live because, at 8, 9 years old, my friends are riding bikes or out front playing baseball and doing all these things. And because my mom had 2 other kids, at my house, my older brother's responsibility was to watch my youngest brother, and my responsibility was to watch the one older than him. And so I spent a lot of my youthful years changing diapers and watching my younger brothers. And right around 9 years old, I was very vocal in my opinion, and I would tell my mom, why'd you have so many kids if you can't take care of them? And in that, my mom felt very disrespected and like I was being unloyal and very selfish. But the truth of the matter is I just wasn't ready to be a father, and I was watching my childhood pass by me. And I became very bitter in that. And so right around 11 years old, when I started junior high school, I started trying just not to be home. And so my brother never had my older brother's always been like my mom's right-hand man, so like the one she can count on. And even to this day, their relationship is very much like that. And I always wanted that, but because I was so not wanting to be a team player in that, I was, I was black sheeped pretty much. And so
What is the black sheep in your mind?
and for me, it's having three brothers, it was almost like being put out, you know what I mean? Like you're not in the circle. you're not in the in crowd in the family. And so even, I think what helped me a lot was my Nana favored me a lot because she liked to laugh a lot. She had imparted her artistic abilities to me. And so we used to just paint and draw and do stuff like that. Or my Nana would have me model and just sit there while she would draw and sketch me. But she was also my savior. And so a lot of times when my mom was getting too crazy with the abuse, it'd be my Nana who came out and was like, stop hitting him. Like, and so, I think in that, I lost my virginity at like 12 years old. You know what I mean? And I started from there.
So life began to get very fast.
I matured. Yeah, it's like I missed my childhood and I was forced to just grow up. And so right around 13, what had happened is my mom we had moved out of my grandparents' house. I think maybe around 14 years old. We moved out of my grandparents' house into an apartment across the street. And my brother had this friend he got thrown out of his house and needed a place to stay. And my brother didn't have a lot of friends at that time, but this was one of his buddies. And so when my mom ended up bringing him in, we had a 2-bedroom apartment, me, my 3 brothers, and now my brother's friend. And what my mom didn't know is at my high school, this guy was like the drug kingpin. And so he was the one who introduced me to things like smoking, and smoking led to this, drinking, and drinking led to this. And by the time I was, 15 years old, I was a full-on drug addict. So,
what was your drug of choice?
Methamphetamines.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And so,
so with bipolarism and methamphetamine, what did it do to you?
Honestly, it made me very unpredictable. It made me to where I was very poor at making decisions and choices. But I think because I just didn't want to go to sleep. At 15 years old, well, first, right around 12, my mom pretty much had hit her point where she was maxed out with me. And the gentleman that my first white friend that I played Little League with, his parents really liked me. And so right around 12 years old, my mom tried to give me up for adoption to them. And so...
Hold on. 12 years old, mom's like, I'm done with you. Hey, here's a nice family. Maybe they could take care of you.
Well, the way she worded it was like, I can't afford to give you the lifestyle that you want. I can't afford to give you the life that you desire. And they can. And they want to take you. And so I remember over summers, like my mom would I'd go there and stay the summers, and sometimes like, because this guy's, his grandfather lived in Canada, I would travel with them and do stuff. And so, but I always got homesick because I had 3 brothers, you know what I mean? And I grew up with my brothers. And so there's times like when they would travel like to Hawaii or the Virgin Islands, and I'd be like, no, I ain't gonna go because that's 2 weeks and my brothers are here. And so my desire was always to travel with my brothers. But like I said, we hit a point where my mom was just like, I want to do this. And I had to beg my mom. And I'll just say this, like when you go number 1 in the draft in your family, like you don't really feel, you don't really.
Yeah, that's not the draft you're looking for.
Yeah.
You're being traded.
Straight up. And it didn't sit well with me. And so I remember in that season, like I had come to my mom and I was like, I had finally just told her, I said, Mom, how come you never ever told me you loved me? And that really sat with me because it was the only time in my whole life that I wish my mom had lied to me. But in a lot of ways, I'm thankful that she did it now. Because what she did is she looked at me and she said, you know why? She goes, because every time I look at you, all I can see is your dad.
Oh, man.
And I remember in that season, like how it made me feel like it just broke me, man. But at least she was honest. And so, you know, like when you grow up without a father, that's the worst thing a son can hear is like, you're like that dude, the one that used to beat me, the one that used to treat me like this, the one that bailed out.
And it wasn't necessarily that you were doing those things. It was the look that reminded her of her past. And so she's taking it out on you.
Yeah, that, and I didn't play team ball, you know what I mean? I didn't go along with all the things that she wanted me to, and I imagine that's how my dad was, you know, was with her. And I mean, and in all reality, I'm the one I'm short like my dad, I'm dark skinned, you know what I mean? My personality is probably the most like his. And so in that I could understand what she was saying, but needless to say, it didn't feel good to hear my mom say that. But the one thing that I'm thankful for is when we had that conversation, she's like, I remember my mom telling me, like, I'll tell you from now on, like, I'll tell you. And I'm thankful for that, because ever since that day, my mom always tells me she loves me. And so it would be a few years after, 15 years old, where my mom would call it quits on me. And the reason why is we had finally moved to West Covina into a house that my aunt owned, and she was renting it to my mom. And so we were living there, me, my 3 brothers, and my mom. And by then, me and my older brother were just not, you know, he was the one who was like, didn't mind being poor, didn't mind staying at home, and he, you know, he forfeited going out with friends and doing all that stuff to be home watching my brothers. And whereas for me, like, I was a popular kid in school, and I wanted to go to the parties, and I wanted to go ride bike. I wanted to do stuff with my friends because I had a lot of friends, and so we were just very different in that. But it created an animosity and a division in the relationship. And so what happened at 15 was my brother had come to my mom and was like, she's like, I can't live with David. Like, either he goes or I go. And so because my older brother, he was the only one who drove. We were going to school in Walnut, but living in West Covina. And so my mom came to me and she's like, I got to ask you to leave because your brother, he's the one who drives your brothers to school. And like, I need him. And so I remember looking at my mom and telling her, like, well, where am I going to go? And she was like, not my problem. Like, you just can't be here. And so at 15 years old, I moved out and I became homeless. So I slept on park benches. I slept elementary school because sometimes I would call my friends and I couldn't get a place to stay. And you know, like when you're that age and you call your buddy, sometimes their mom or dad is like, yeah, he could stay the night, but he has to be gone in the morning. And so I found myself in that situation a lot. And a lot of times parents wouldn't let me stay, so I'd just sleep wherever I could.
Wow.
I think that's what led to the drugs, though, because methamphetamines will keep you up. And when you're sleeping on the streets, like,
you don't want to sleep.
You don't want to sleep. And so that's really what got me into that. And then on top of that, I slept in my buddy's garage for about 1.5 years during high school. So from 15 all the way up to graduation, I just bounced around. But I slept in my buddy's garage sophomore year, and then all the way up to my junior year. And then I ended up moving into my buddy's house, which was a meth house. I moved into a crack house. And when you live in a house like that, you partake. And so soon after, I would get thrown out of school because I'd be up all night, and by the time I got to school, right around 3rd period, 4th period, I was crashing out every day. And so, yeah, the school kind of caught on. And so I ended up getting thrown out of school. And the reason why was I was selling methamphetamines at school when I got caught.
Man. So your whole teenage years are filled with uncertainty, feeling like I'm being traded, then I'm being loved, but then to bring peace, the decision's made, and you feel like you're the black sheep, the odd man out, and you're sent away. Now you're trying to find a way to, hold on to reality of life. I mean, I don't know if you can remember, but Tell me a little bit about what did it mean to you when you're not just bouncing around, but you're going from park bench to schools to wherever you can find. I can't comprehend at 15 not having a place to stay, because my world was not like that. How did you cope with the thought of that rejection?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I would crank call my house sometimes. And I could hear my mom and my brothers laughing in the background. I could hear the TV on. And I wouldn't say nothing, I would just listen. And in that, the feeling of they don't really care about where I'm at and what I'm going through. The fact that I'm homeless and I have no food. And so that's really what got me into, and living in a meth house, I started getting, I would watch this lady's kids for her, and she would give me free meth. And so what I would do is I'd sell it. And then what I'd do is I would go downstairs to the laundry room and put different stuff in it to make more. So chop it up and turn a couple of grams into 4 grams, and this is how I was able to make ends meet to feed myself.
Man.
Yeah, and so then the following year at 16, I got my high school girlfriend pregnant, and I would become a teenage father soon after that. And so I think now that I think of that, that's probably the first time I ever prayed, because I was so strung out that what ended up happening is my girlfriend at the time, she wanted to have an abortion at 16 years old, or 16 years old. And I thought that's what we were gonna do. And then there hit a point in the pregnancy where she felt the baby kick, she felt my son kick. And I never ever told anybody this, but in that moment, I broke up with her. I was like, we're gonna keep this, like my career's gone, I'm done. And then something happened, as soon as that happened, within like 20 minutes. And all I could think about was my dad bailing out on me and never being there. And
Oh, man.
Like, I don't wanna be that guy. And so I remember like 20 minutes later, picking up the phone, calling her, and I was like, hey, whatever you wanna do, like I'm down with it. Like, whatever it is, you wanna have a baby, like we'll have this baby. And so that's how my son was born. And so in that, when she was like, yeah, I wanna keep it. And so I remember that was the first time I'd ever prayed, and I was like, Lord, just let him be healthy. Because I destroyed my body, and I never thought like it would impact my life in that way, but I was like, Lord, let him just be healthy. And so, yeah, I ended up having my son I had just turned 17, and my son was born. I think I had been 17 2 months. And so, yeah, I grew up with my son going to my high school varsity games, and he's been at my high school graduation, my college graduation. Like
He's journeyed with life. But even when your son came, you would think maybe this is a straightening out point.
Yeah, no, it really wasn't, only because, you know, I was still homeless. I was still, you know, barely getting by. And she came from a good family. And so I was going through custody battles at like 18 years old. You know, when you're in high school, unfortunately, those relationships don't really, you know, have a high probability of success. But yeah, right at senior year when we were graduating, I just remember his mom telling me, you know, I feel like we're just good friends. Like, I don't see us being, you know, married and this and that. And so what we did is we just shared custody. And so I spent every moment I could, because I was just so attached to my son. Like, he was like my whole life. So every time I get out of soccer practice, I'd go straight to her house and hang out with him till he went to bed. And then I'd go back to the meth house. And I just did that all through high school, all the way up until senior year, until we called it quits. But yeah, I think for me, you know, putting him priority was really the only thing that kept me going was him. And so I had a lot of good teachers in high school that would allow me 6th period to bring my son with me. And so sometimes he'd hang out with me in class. But yeah, by the time I was 18 years old, what had ended up happening is my son was about 2 or 3, or I was like, yeah, 18, 19, and she decided to get married and elope. And so I went from seeing my son every day to one day her mom called in and was like, where's his stuff? Where's Laura's stuff and Daniel's stuff? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she just moved out of state, got married, and disappeared. And so then it took me like 2.5 years to find him.
So she literally took
my son and jammed out the next day and was gone for almost 3 years.
So no conversations, no nothing. Just bounced?
Just bounced.
Wow. Where's your world go?
It went upside down. It went upside down. I was, for months driving places, trying to hire private, for a season I was working with her mom, and her mom had hired a private eye just to try and locate him. And
so not even her mom knew where the daughter disappeared to.
No, nobody heard anything until their marriage started to fail, and it was like I said, almost 3 years later, she would come back into the scene with her mom, who I thought was on my side, but because now she had her daughter back and her grandchild, I was X'd out.
Yeah.
And so it was only because my brother had happened to see them at the mall that I knew she was back. And so then boom, I filed papers, and like I said, right around that time, I started going through custody battles already and all that stuff.
My God. I can't imagine one of my children being ripped out of my life at any point, I mean, I have a daughter that's away at college, and that's hard enough, but, that's a choice, and she's there with my blessing. But to have a son that you're devoting your life to, making a choice, I'm going to be the father I never had, and the value that he probably gave you, once that's gone, I'm sure that probably only heightened all the hurt, the pain, and the frustration of life. I'm sure that took you down some dark trails.
I think that's when the drug use really started kicking up. And then all of a sudden, now I was battling with suicide, tried to hang myself. I had OD'd a couple of times.
So wait, you said you tried to hang yourself?
Yeah, my mom had rented an apartment above me. I was living in Anaheim, and my mom was living up directly above my apartment. And I tried. I was gonna hang myself from her apartment because she had the top level. And
but it was probably also to prove a point.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think I wanted to be missed. I wanted to be recognized. I wanted to be, I wanted my mom to feel bad. I think, that
regret.
Yeah.
Pain.
And so what I ended up doing is I signed up for the military. Yeah, I signed up for the military. By then I had already left Mount Sac. I had an AA degree, and so the military was going to accept me, and I was going to come out with a little bit of rank because I had education. And what ended up happening is I was driving out to MEPS over in like Long Beach or something, where right before they ship you out. And as I was going out there, the recruiter had said, "All right, so you're all good. You don't have any parking, or you don't have any tickets or anything like that, and any warrants." And I was like, "No, I had some traffic tickets, but I've been making payments on them for last year or whatnot." And as soon as I said that, boom, she turned around, and she's like, "Oh, you can't leave if you're making payments on tickets." And I was like, "What?" You know what I mean? And so she ended up turning around, and I was like, "You know what? I'm not signing up for the military. Forget it then." Yeah, and so it was probably the following year I ended up going back to school. I ended up going back to school finally.
Man, what a journey. I mean, most people don't ever unfold the hell because we like to just stuff it down and be like, I'm good. But I know that there is many different places where this anger bubbled up. At 4 years old, we saw a glimpse of it. You're poking a guy in the nose, on multiple occasions. You're growing up, fighting with your brothers, settling it like men. I know there was a time where you've shared with me how you and your brother handled up one of your mom's boyfriends one time.
My mom's husband now. Yeah. It was crazy because in high school, once you have a child, because I was a jock, but once I had a baby, I stopped hanging around with all the jocks and doing all the, the things that athletes do, and I started just kind of hanging out with the gangsters. And one of my friends, who's now doing life, he was a killer back then. And so, matter of fact, he's doing life for a murder he did while we were in high school.
Jeez.
And so I was hanging out with him a lot, and he was just getting me into a lot of trouble, or I shouldn't say causing me, I'm responsible for my own actions, but he was really influencing me in a way where I was doing things that I would never think that I would be doing. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up moving out to Orange County. My mom moved me out because what ended up happening is my stepdad, now my mom's husband, had hit my mom. And my mom called me and my older brother. And so what I did is I called my buddy, who was, like I said, he was a mean dude. And we went down there. And I remember he wanted to go up. He wanted to kill my mom's boyfriend at the time. And so we made him wait downstairs. And me and my older brother went upstairs. And we just had a field day on this dude. And matter of fact, my mom even jumped in. It was crazy. Like, my brother just grabbed this guy, grabbed him. My stepdad's like 6'4". He's a big dude. And I remember my brother just went in. We both went in and rushed him. And my brother just grabbed him, laid him on the bed, and had him in a chokehold. And I just stood on his belly and just mounted him. And I just started, throwing the bees at him. And I remember just doing it so much to where I got tired. I had to take a breather because I was just bam, bam. And I remember my mom coming behind my brother, or to her husband now, and she started on him, and she told him, I told you my sons were going to come. And so I had told my brother, I'd pick him up. And we were in the top, the second story of her house, and I was like, let's throw him out the window. And so we picked him up. My brother grabbed his arms, I grabbed his legs, and we tried to throw him out the window, but he was so big, he didn't go high enough. And so he hit the wall before the window, but that guy he should have went out the window, but we just weren't big enough or strong enough. But yeah, we almost threw that guy out the window, but.
Right. It's, now you laugh about it, but the truth is that was just nothing more than pent up anger and hostility. I know that I know that you've gone through this many different cycles. Did you ever end up in prison or jail?
I went to jail, and honestly, it's funny you say that because I never thought I would end up in jail. But my mom had always told, what's crazy? My mom always told me since I was a little kid, she's like, you're never gonna see 18. Like, you're never gonna make it to 18. And so I remember when I turned 18, my mom cried. She bawled. She's like, I never thought you were gonna live this long. And so even when I met my wife, I told her, I was like, you probably don't want to date me. Like, I'm not gonna live long. Like, that was always my mindset. But yeah, I just never had the expectation to live a long life. And so making the mistakes I did and doing the things I was doing, I knew it was a matter of time. And so I had been to a couple of city jails for fights and different things, but it wasn't until the first time that I went to county jail. And that just changed everything for me. I was like, man, I'm not supposed to be here. And so, yeah, I did an overnighter in county. And that really just shifted things for me because I was like, this could be my life if I don't.
Yeah, you could become like your mom's boyfriend, the serial, what you call the serial convict.
Which is interesting because the day I got out of county, I went out. When I got out, my mom was at a Mexican restaurant with him, with my little brother's dad. And honestly, I'm so thankful for that day because I don't think my mom ever understood. My mom's been locked up before too. My mom's done probably a week or two in a city jail, but she never had the opportunity to go to county. But my little brother's dad had been to prison over 20 years, but he'd done a lot of county time too. And so I remember I met them at this restaurant in Pomona, and when I went there, he was the only one who had empathy for me. He was the only one who understood like the trauma that you experience when you're in county jail. And he really, he loved on me for just like an hour. And just being, it was the first time that I was able to be around him again and receive, because I really appreciated that, at least he understood what I had just been through. And my mom was just like, welcome back.
So in the plethora of all the craziness that you lived, tell me just a crazy story of life. You know, there's, I mean, I know you have many crazy stories, especially with drugs, you know.
Yeah.
You got to have a moment where God intervened and you didn't even know it, where you could look back now as a believer and go, dang, life shouldn't even be here.
Yeah, no, I definitely have tasted death a number of times. I've been held up at gunpoint twice. I've been held up at night
So,
once.
all right there. Not once, twice. So what's the first experience?
First experience being held up at gunpoint was with Jack. I was, I was selling dope. And, when you're in that game, sometimes people want to take advantage or, take what you got. And I had this guy.
So you're slinging at this time?
Yeah, I was selling. But at that time, I shifted. I wasn't no longer dealing with meth. I was dealing with cannabis. And so this was prior to it being legalized and all that stuff. But to be quite honest, I'd sell anything. So I always had a broker mentality. So if you were looking for powder, I'd get you powder. You're looking for that, you know what I mean? And so
you had to connect.
Yeah, you use what you have, your network. And so I had a guy show up at my house, and he was like, "I'm not going to pay you." And so I was like, "Yeah, right." And so we had some words that he pulled out his gun, and then I had my buddy there with me, and I told him, "Hold on, I'm gonna put my shoes on real quick, and then I'm gonna stomp you." And while he had his gun on me, right? And so I laced up my boots, and so I walked up to him, and I felt like if I just bang him once, my buddy's here, then we're gonna do what we do. You know what I mean? And so this guy was like this, but his hand was shaking. And so I put my forehead on the barrel of his gun, and I said, "Squeeze that."
So that has to be bipolarism kicking in right there. That is not a sane or rational thought.
Totally.
It reminds me of in the Bible, David is in the prison, and he began to act like a crazy man. I think you and David in the Bible right there are probably a little neck and neck.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's the bipolarism. You don't think prophetically. You don't think ahead. You know what I mean? You're like in the now and whatever. But yeah, I think it was a bad decision. But thank God he didn't. But yeah, he was like this, and I told him, "Man, you're about to shoot me on accident." You know what I mean? And so I told him, "What's going to happen if I go to my safe and I grab my gun? Because I'm not afraid to squeeze mine." And so he ended up in broad daylight, backing out of my house, walking from the front door all the way to his car like this, with the gun pointed at me, like he didn't want me following him. But that was the first time I had been held up at gunpoint.
So did he pay you?
Nah.
He didn't take the stuff either?
No, he had owed me money for stuff I had given him before, and he was there to grab more. And I wasn't gonna release it, but he had owed me. I think that little deal cost me like $4,000 or $5,000. Yeah, but my family's from La Puente, and when you have an issue, like there's people you call. You know.
So the matter got resolved in a different way.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll leave that alone.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, all these things that were just so outside of my character. Like nobody in my family ever thought that I would. Someone who was such a great student. I used to win art contests all the time. Used to get academic awards all the time. From the time I was in first grade, I'd always been I was in the GATE program, so I was always in a class that was a hybrid for the class above. So I was either in a first, second combination class, a third, fourth combination class, all the way up until I started middle school. And so prior to that, like I said, it was just nothing but awards via sports, academics, art.
While you're living through all these different traumas.
Yeah, and it's crazy because you try to keep it under wraps. You know what I mean? So when I'm in high school, I'm not wanting people to know like what my life is really like, but I was dealing with real world issues. Well, they were thinking about where they were going to go hang out and
what they were going to eat next.
Yeah.
You know, if they're going to Pizza Hut or McDonald's.
Yep.
And you're like, I just want to eat. Man, so you not only got held up at your house by a guy, you said you got put at gunpoint twice. So was not once wasn't enough? So, well, I mean, how do you find yourself in this scenario?
Selling drugs, you know what I mean? But the second time was I had a guy who I didn't know very well. And so I had a feeling he was, you deal with unsavory people, and I had a feeling he was going to be a little reckless. And so when I picked him up, I had texted him before, or I had told him before. I was like, hey, look, like don't strap. You know what I mean? We'll do the exchange, but don't carry any piece. And so sure enough, I just felt like he was. And so I told my buddy, I was like, hey, I need you to have your strap, but sit in the back seat. And when this dude gets in the front, like, just know in case anything happens, right? And so anyways, this guy gets in my car, and I told my girlfriend at the time, park around the corner, and I left all the dope in the trunk of her car. So I didn't even have it on me. So I was already prepared to get jacked. And so, yeah, I made him sit in, he got him in the passenger seat, and then as soon as he got in, I could just tell.
You could feel it.
And I told him, I said,
Your spidey senses?
I told you not to strap. And he looked at me, and then he reached in like this. And just as he was about to pull it, I said, you see the guy behind you? What do you think he has? And I said, you pull that out. And I said, then what? And I said, let me just tell you something. I don't even have it with me. My girlfriend's parked around the corner. It's in her car. I said, so until I count out your cash, like, we're not doing anything. And so I remember he thought about it, and then he got out. It's like, leave it in your car. And so like a minute, he got out, put his piece in the car, and then we did the exchange. But
so he came thinking,
he came to get me.
I'm going to heist you.
Yeah, he came to get me.
I guess, would you say that maybe that was the prophetic sense in you?
I would say now, because now in hindsight, there's been many times where I've had that and it's saved my behind. And so honestly, that's why now it's crazy in the position I'm in now and in the role and title that I have now. You know, I could see all the times where God had preserved me for something else.
Had a call. He had a call in your life to awaken a shepherd, to awaken a prophetic voice, to awaken a man of destiny. And so through all of these hardships, all of these craziness in life, when did the switch make place? I know that your wife, Kylene, she's how would I say, she grew up on the other side of the block.
Yeah.
So how did you guys even meet?
We met on a blind date. But praise God that I had already been introduced by that time to God, just in a different way, or I had finally been introduced. I had never. So what had ended up happening is after I graduated high school, my mom had been living in Palmdale for a while with her husband, and so she was far, and I always wanted to stay close to my son, and so I got my first apartment at like 18, and my mom helped me, and so she would help me with the rent, just so I could stay close to my son and go to school. And so shortly after that, I was in that apartment. My mom couldn't afford to help me anymore. I lost this apartment. I had no place to stay again. And a buddy of mine from high school, and it was at the end of summer, right before my first year of college. And so I had asked him if I could stay at his house and attend Mount Sac. And so his parents agreed, with the contingency that I go to church with them. They were Christians. And it's crazy because, at that time, a lot of my friends were, they were jocks, football players, and you know how high school kids are. And I remember her always telling me, like you can't be friends with those people, and you shouldn't do this. And it was just a spirit of religion, you know what I mean? But it was either go with them, live here, and go to church with them, or be homeless. And so it was a real easy choice.
Yeah, live on the street or live in a bed, live in a house.
So they would take me to different churches, and I would just do the time. You know what I mean? But there was one time where I was in a service, and the pastor was speaking, and he had done an altar call, and he had said, if you brought someone with you, he says, you bring them up. You know what I mean? And I remember in that moment sitting in the church wanting to go up, but not having the courage to do so. And I remember, I'll never forget this, my buddy at the time looked at me and he goes, David, if you want to go up, I'll go up with you. And I was like, I want to go up. And I remember going up and receiving the Lord for the first time, because I felt like this message was for me. But what ended up happening is this lady was so religious, and I couldn't be friends with these people, and I shouldn't be talking to so-and-so, and these were like my best friends. And I never really felt like it was of God. Like, I was like, is that how Christians are? Like, is that how godly people are? It's like, you can only be around godly people, you know? And I wasn't willing to walk away from my friends at the time. And so I ended up leaving there. And then I never went to church again. And it wasn't until I started dating this lady, or I started dating this young woman in my first year of college. And I would end up moving into an apartment with her for a short time, and then we'd lose the apartment. And then she would go back and move back home. And what in that time, her mom had extended an invite and said, if you want to stay here so you can go to school, she goes, you can stay here, and I have a room for your son too. And for me, it was just like a blessing, like in disguise, like I could go to school and not have to worry about paying bills and rent and this and that. And so I did that. I moved into her house, and I signed up for school. And because I was bipolar and dealing with a lot of baggage from my past, I became a lot like my dad in the sense that I was verbally abusive. I was one who would go off the hinges. And one day what had happened is that had happened a number of times. But one day the conviction just sat into me. I was sitting by myself, and I thought to myself, I don't even have family who loves me like this. Like, if this was my house and I was the man of this house, like, I would have been stomping my own brains in. Like I would never let anyone talk to my daughter like that, or be disrespectful like this in my house, right? But my girlfriend at the time, her parents, they never ever did that. And as a matter of fact, they just continued to love me. And it was so crazy to me because, and you know, there were, you know, white people, and I would just trip out because they all ate dinner at the table together. They never ever used cuss words in their house, but they weren't Christians. There was no Bible in their house, but he was the best dad I had ever seen. And she was the best mom I had ever seen. And everybody recognized them as just this amazing family. And in that conviction state, I thought to myself, God has to be real. How else could strangers like this love someone like me, given what I do and who I am and all the things that I struggle with, and they're just still loving on me. And so in that, I was like, man, God has to be real. And so what had ended up happening was, years later, she would go into remittance, when her cancer would come back, and then her body began to decay, and I remember that season feeling so brokenhearted, and I remember when they brought her home for hospice, when it was already done, and she was just coming home to die.
Man.
And so I remember this man, her husband, to this day, I've never met a father better than this man. And this man was like my grandfather. He was a manly man. I had never seen him be emotional. I never ever heard him cuss. He was just every time he was working, building something, his son was with him. You know, I mean, he just had this amazing relationship with his kids and his wife. Like, he had just the amazing family. And I remember when they came to get her body, she passed away at like 5:30 in the morning, and she passed away with a smile on her face. And I remember just the family being there, and just this dead silence. But then the knock on the door, and they came to get the body. And I remember they brought in the gurney, and I remember they pulled her off and put her on, and it was his last moment to say goodbye. I remember him leaning like this over his wife who had passed. And he let out this cry, like his soul was crying, this deep yell. This man who I'd never seen cry before, ever be weak, he just broke, like his spirit. And in that moment, I looked at him, and I had told the Lord, before I leave this earth, I want to love something that much. I want to experience love at that level to where if I lose it, it'll feel like my soul's been ripped out of my chest. And it was at that moment that I decided I wanted to be a Christian. Like I wanted to follow God. I want to experience love like this because I know he has to be real.
Mm.
And so that's, I think, was the turning point. A family that wasn't believers, or a family that I didn't know. They had never gone to church. There was no Bible. But I remember in that time I had already been introduced to God, and prior to her coming home, I was visiting her in the hospital every day. I had led her to Christ. And she was like, David, she goes, I've always loved God. She goes, even though you've never heard me pray, or we don't go to church, and we don't, she goes, I love God. I love Jesus. And so, yeah, I think that's one of those moments that made me just want to shift in everything. And so, and what would end up happening is shortly after, prior to as I was graduating senior year from Cal State Fullerton, I became so obsessed with analyzing behavior and understanding why decisions are made and why people live the lives that they do, that I went as a business major. I double majored, and I double majored in sociology, the study of human behavior, because I was so intrigued. But I was selling dope. In that time, I had not only brokered things illegal, but I was also brokering things that were legal. I just always saw opportunity. And so my next door neighbor, he was a senior purchaser for a company who would spend millions in purchasing labels for Nutrisystem products, or Herbalife, the labels that go on. And he would talk about, we'd be out doing things we shouldn't be doing. And he'd be talking about, I'm spending all this money and I don't make anything. And I was like, man, you need a labeler who's going to hit you on the kickback. And so what I ended up doing in college is I brokered this deal between a label printer and his company, and I would just get checks sent to me every time they printed. And so they would send me like sometimes 2-3 checks a week, 200, 400, 600. And I was always business inclined, you know what I mean? And so what ended up happening is this lady I met in college, she was at the same college, we used to hang out and we were all doing things we shouldn't be doing. But her father had died, and he had owned property. And so she had come to me and she was like, David, she goes, I heard you're really good with money and finance. And she goes, this is what's happening. My dad passed and he left me a house in Oakland. And she goes, and I want to sell it. She goes, but when I sell it, from the 200,000 equity that I'm going to get back, I might only see 120 after they tax me. She's like, what can I do? And so I had this great idea at the time. I said, well, you can give me that 200,000. I'm gonna put it down on this house. I'm gonna buy this house, and I promise you, in 3 years, I'll give you 250. And I said, and so you'll not only get your full 200, but you'll get an extra 50. And she was like, that sounds great. So what I did is, and at the time, this was prior to ARM loans coming out, and so it was very easy to get a loan, or at least what I thought. Was in my mind, from the finance perspective, like you put 200 racks down, it's 50%. The house I bought was $435,000, almost 50%. I'm like, dude, the payment's gonna be nothing, golden. And so what ends up happening is, I go through the loan process. The house that I was trying to buy was on the same street I grew up on, 8 houses up from my grandparents, and that was my dream, was to move back so I could take care of my grandparents. And so I end up doing all this stuff, and every loan officer is denying me. And so me and this woman, because I had her on the title as well. And so then finally, it was the first time I had cried out and prayed to God for something. And I was like, you know what, God, if you're real, I need you to show me right now. I need you to make a way. And if you're real and you show up, I'll be in church every Sunday like clockwork. You ain't gonna have to wake me up. You ain't gonna have to remind me it's time to go. I promise you I'll be there every Sunday. I think within 2 or 3 days, I got a call, and they finally found a company that would pick up the loan. And so I bought this house, and my payment was like $1,200. And I was working at the time, but I was also doing stuff on the side, which easily made that. And so I was like, yeah, no problem. And so what ended up happening, I got that house, the lady that I partnered with, she needed money 2 years instead of 3 years. She didn't want to wait the 3. She needed 2 years. And so I told her at that time I would refinance and cash you out. And so that's what I did. I ended up pulling out $235 out of equity, and I gave her $235, and that's how I ended up with my first house.
Man. And so out of this, how did you end up coming into meeting Kay? Pastor.
I had a friend of mine that I played college soccer with. It was his 30th birthday. They were like a year or two older than me. And so I think I was about 28. And he was having his 30th birthday at this hotel in LA, a really swanky hotel. And we showed up, and a friend of his sister was there. So his buddy was there, and his sister that was there. And his sister came up to me, and she was, just talking to me, and she goes, do you have a girlfriend? She goes, because I have this friend that I think you would really hit it off with. And I'm like, for real, where's she at? And I guess she was supposed to be there that night. So she calls her up, and she's telling her, you got to come and this and that. And so, make a long story short, she didn't want to drive all the way to LA by herself and this and that. And so what she ends up doing is she says, well, we're going to, me and my friends, we're going to Hawaii in this or next week. And she goes, when we get back, she goes, I don't want to introduce her to you before we leave, because then she's going to want to hang out with. She goes, but when we get back, right? And so what ended up happening is they got back from Hawaii. I was working for JP Morgan as a recruiter. And so it was the first time I had like a nice business card, and I had arrived, and I had my own house, and I felt like the man, And so, we met at Applebee's. That was our first date. We met at Applebee's on a blind date. And I remember looking at her and we sat and we enjoyed just conversation and just finding out a little bit about her. I'm like, man, as soon as she finds out like what I'm about, what I do, and the kind of people I run with, like, she's gone, because my wife was raised in the things of God. Yeah, I mean, she had never ever seen like movies. Like, she was only allowed to watch spiritual movies, so she watched like the testimony of like one of the pastors.
Passion for Christ.
that stuff. She had never seen Star Wars. She had never seen Godfather. She had never seen Goonies.
Oh my God.
These things, like, I watched Scarface when I was probably like 7 or something. Like, two different worlds. And so it was interesting, because when our worlds collided, it was like when I met her, I didn't want to touch her, be physical with her. I just wanted to enjoy her company, because I knew it was limited. Like, as soon as she finds out, like, she's gone. And so I just wanted to enjoy the time. So I would take her to places like the Getty Museum, or I would just take her to do stuff that was just outside of me, and that we would just somehow form a friendship. And so finally she came to me and she was like, I know what you do. Like, what do you? I'm a recruiter for JP Morgan. Like,
yeah,
I got a solid job. Like, what are we talking about? And she's like, no, I know what's going on. And I was like, oh, dude.
Here it comes.
Yeah, and so what ended up happening was, I take her to a party, my buddy's wife's 30th party at his house. And all my friends, we're all high school buddies. They're all in a circle, and they're all smoking pot and this and that. And I'm like, walking in, and I have my wife now, who's the girl I'm dating. She wasn't even my girlfriend. She was just a girl I just started dating. And I walked in, and my buddy hands a joint to me. He's like, hey, Dave, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, man, haven't done that since high school, bro. Like, and I grabbed it like this, and he looked at me. He's like, I just bought it from you yesterday, dude.
Oh.
And I'm like, bro. I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing, right? And so, like, he kind of threw me under the bus, and that's when it sparking the conversation.
He's like, no, you hit it yesterday with me. Man, I was like, great friend, dude, great friend. But yeah, so Kylie would end up telling me, she's like, I know what you do, and I was like, how do you know? And she's like, David, everywhere we go, like, you'll stop by places and people just hand you money. And what I did is I had different soldiers like placed in different places throughout different cities, and I would do runs to pick up what they owed me.
And so I've always had bundles of cash, and then I'd take, Kylene out, and I was always like, it's stupid, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, she was like, I've caught on.
I figured you out.
But yeah, it's crazy because, I lived life really fast. And at that time, arm loans were really easy to get. I had bought a condo in Marina Del Rey overlooking the ocean, and I was living real fast. And so, I kind of took Kylene there when and it was empty, just to kind of impress her, you know what I mean? But I was living life so fast that I couldn't sustain it. And so when those arm loans came to maturity and then they adjusted, I could no longer afford it. And so what ended up happening is I foreclosed that house, that condo, and then now was impacting me in such a way I was about to foreclose my house. I was about to lose everything, right? And that was the story of my life, was that no matter how much I was making or earning, I could never sustain it. So like I got robbed for 80 grand one time, and like every time I was coming up, then boom, I'd hit a huge loss. And then I come up, and so it was just really volatile, right? And so finally I was at that point where I was getting ready to start a business. I had just started business with my buddy Jack, and my cousin, who's a pastor's kid, he came to me one day and he was like, David, and they were working for me. And he's like, I'll never forget this. He told me, David, the Lord told me if you continue to sell drugs, he said, God will not honor this business and it will never go anywhere. And I was like, well, then cool, then you're out of a job because I can't pay you, dude. Like, this is how I pay you, you know what I mean? And so, because the company wasn't making any money, you know what I mean? It wasn't not enough to pay these guys. And so I'll never forget that, because then when I hit that season where I couldn't sustain it, I remember I was like, you know what, Lord? I was like, I prayed, and I was like, if you would just give me her, like, I'll be happy being broke and homeless. But if I could have her, like, I'll be a good boy the rest of my life. I promise you.
Bargaining with God.
Again. And guess what? God showed up, and my deal that I made with God was like, that's what pulled me into going more than a Sunday service. It was that time when I was like, Lord, if you give me her, like, I'll be a good boy, man. And that's what got me into going to marriage retreats, got me going to Wednesday services, Friday nights, conferences on the weekend. That's what got me into doing that stuff, because I told the Lord, and in that time, I had told the Lord, like what I did is I gave myself up for adoption at 30 years old. I was in a service and I heard this pastor talk about how God would father the fatherless, mother the motherless, brother the brotherless. And I remember in that church service, I remember telling the Lord, I got a brother and I got a mother, but what I don't have. And so I told the Lord, I said, if you'll father me and let me tangibly feel it, that you're fathering me, I said, I'll go all the way with you. Like, the time I would have spent with my earthly father here on earth, I spend with you. So on the weekend time, instead of visiting my dad, I'm gonna go visit you. And when I get home from work, instead of calling my biological dad, I'm gonna call on you. I told the Lord, if you'll father me and you'll take that place, the time I would have spent with my earthly dad, I'll spend with you.
Wow.
And that's what got me into going to church the way I do and getting into the things of God like I did.
Wow. So I'm trying to think, how long have you and I known each other?
Since 2017.
17?
So, what, 8 years or something?
Yeah. So I remember one of the first times I went and preached at the church you attended. And then we got invited to do a marriage retreat, I believe it was. Right then, your life has shifted. You're now serving God. You're married. You're a business owner, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But in that moment where we had that marriage retreat, something shifted inside of you. What happened?
A week prior to going to the marriage retreat, my wife got introduced to the healing rooms in Rancho. And the man there gave her a word, and in that word, he had told her, don't tell your husband about any of this stuff until you get back from your marriage retreat. And so I didn't know, I hadn't been there with her or anything like that. And so I didn't know this till after. But we had already been starting to serve in the healing rooms. And for some reason, my wife would get these vivid images and these vivid pictures. And I was always wowed by them because I was never one who got visions and pictures and things like that from the Spirit. And so I was always really wowed by that. But she signed us up for this marriage retreat. You and Miss Juanita are there. And as soon as we walk in, day one, we walk in, and I saw you and Miss Juanita behind a table to the left. And as soon as I looked at you guys, I looked at my wife and I said, man, you're going to trip out right now. And she goes, what? I said, and because I had never seen visions. I said, I'm looking over there at those two people. I didn't know your names. I'm looking over there at those two people, and I see our heads on their bodies. Crazy, huh? And she's like, oh, that's so crazy. And so then in that marriage retreat, you would prophesy over us, not just once, but twice. So day one, you spoke over us, but then day two, you had spoken over my wife and I. And you had mentioned something very profound to my wife, because I noticed you had been, you were ministering to her, and you said, I see you at the age of 15, and I see this, and I see, and the things you had hit must have been right on, because my wife started bawling. She started crying her eyes out.
I remember that.
And as that was taking place, I thought to myself, well, I know my wife's story. Her parents didn't get divorced till she was in her early 20s. And I said, so what happened? Like, what? I didn't understand, right? And so what ended up happening was we would leave at the last day of the marriage retreat. We had such a great time. And on the drive, we're driving, literally just pulled out of the hotel. And I asked her, I said, hey, what did, when Prophet Rob had told you that, like, what was he talking about? And she was like, well, I never told you this. She goes, but prior to my parents getting divorced, there was a season where they separated. And she goes, and when that happened, my dad had come home to get his things, and I was the only one home. And my dad packed all his things. And she goes, and when he was walking out the door, she goes, I ran after him. And these are all the things that you had spoken and seen. And she goes, I ran after him, and I asked him, leave your pillow. So while you're gone, like, I can smell you and feel your presence. And when she said that to me, the only thing I could think of was how every time we got in an argument or every time we got in a fight, like, I would jump in my lowrider and bounce. And then the pastor would call me, and I would just hit reject. Because I already knew she was ratting on me. She called the pastor's wife, and they would be calling my phone. I'm like, and so I remember that conviction just hit me, and right away I pulled over. Because I remember every time we would fight, like, that's the way I would deal with it. And then she would, like, pray over me, and then she'd start speaking in tongues and I would start, why are you doing that? It makes me crazy when you do that, because I didn't understand, like. And so anyways, I had pulled over, and I told her, and I looked at her, I said, look, wife, I said, I have to repent to you. I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I just want you to know that I'll find a new way to be frustrated and angry, but what I won't do is I won't leave. Because what I realized was I was making her relive her worst nightmare.
Bounce.
And so I could never make that connection, but I was like, man, like, no. And that was such a breakthrough moment for my marriage. Because I think even at that time, like, my first 3 years of marriage wasn't easy. But I feel like the enemy was still on me. Like, he was still trying to take me into a whole different direction. And honestly, I have to say, like, you know, having my wife and her coming into my life in the season that she did, I've learned so much from her. You know, I've learned a tremendous amount from my wife, and that was really a breakthrough moment for us.
Wow. So we'll touch a couple more things. One of the things, you know, you've went from hardship, traumas, tragedies, to marriage, and then business began to flourish. Your life radically shifted. You understood how to come into the blessing of the Lord. How did your whole business take off?
Well, it was interesting because I was still working for J.P. Morgan, and a buddy of mine had wanted to start a turf business. And this is when the Prophetic really began, and I didn't understand then because I didn't know anything about Prophetic, but we wanted to start this turf business. We sat with these two guys, we were at Yard House. And I remember, I didn't know them, but my partner did at the time. And so we're talking business. And I just remember in that conversation after the dinner was over and we had talked to business, next thing you know, these guys who are both married were like, hey, you know where we can get some cocaine? Hey, you know where there's some women at? Like where we go and there's gonna be women? And I was just like, man, like something didn't sit right. And so I remember when that meeting ended, we left, and I had told my partner, I was like, hey, just so you know, we're partnered with the wrong guys. I mean, like, these aren't the guys. And so what ended up happening is I would be at a festival within my local city, and I would meet the owners of Staples Center, the owners of the LA Kings, Ed Roski and John Simkin. And at that time, they were pitching building the new Rams football stadium in the city of Industry, or city of Walnut, where I'm from. And so I had approached him and I said, you know, I own a turf company and I'm local business. Wouldn't it be wise, if you're gonna do a stadium here, to use a local business to do it, right? And so I sat with this man, just pitched him and left him my information. Well, this dude called me like two or 3 weeks later. And he was like, and I'm thinking, oh man, like, did we get the football contract? And so he's like, he goes, you know, I own this golf course in the city of Industry, the Pacific Palms Hotel. He goes, will you give me an estimate to turf my driving range? And at the time, nobody had done anything like this before. And so we give him this estimate, and I remember we ended up getting this job, and I remember getting the first check. It was like over $250,000. I think it was like $283,000 or something. And I remember showing my partner at the time, and we pulled over. We started dancing in the street because we were so pumped.
Come on now.
But in that first week on this job, I must have spent like $40,000 in glue, because you have to glue this stuff down, right? And I was like, at this rate, we're not going to be able to turn a profit. And so my partner and I had this idea at the time to formulate a glue for artificial grass install that was also green, to match the turf. Nobody had ever done this before, right? And so in that, the guy that did the 49ers football field, we hired their GC, brought him out, flew him out, and we're doing this job, right? And so, but at the same time, we're doing it without a contractor's license. So I'm kind of doing it in a shady way, but I'm using someone else's So anyways, the guys we were partnered up with came, and they tried to take the job from us. And so they came onto the job site and were like, look, man, we'll give you 30 grand and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And so my partner at the time, he was like, yeah, let's just take it, David. Let's just take it. And so then I looked down and I was like, no, we're not. And he's like, David, you don't understand. And so he starts explaining all the contracting stuff. And so I said, this is what I know, man. I said, the favor of God is on us. And I said, and I told you before, we're partnered with the wrong guys. I said, this job's gonna put us on the map, and you and I are the future of this industry. Not even knowing what I was saying, right? It's just
declaring.
That was what I said. And so this guy came and he's trying to yank this job from us, right? And so he's literally in my toy hall. We're out on the job site, and we're having words and we're barking at each other. And so finally I told him, I said, look, I'm gonna knock all your teeth right out your silly face. And I said,
the old David rising up.
And so anyways, before that happened, my partner was able to scoop him out before that, you know what I mean? And we ended up finishing this job, you know, made good money, but exactly what I said, that job put us on the map. In that job, we formulated this glue, right? And so shortly after, what ends up happening is my partner gets an amazing job offer. And rather than us just have a conversation, he just split. And that kind of took me in a direction of, when I find you, like it's on site.
Yeah.
And so
you're gonna go rounds with the champ again.
So that was, we split up, and what ends up happening is we finally decide through a conversation, he was gonna keep the turf company, and I was gonna keep the glue company. That was his background. He knew, and at the time, the glue company wasn't making any money. Like, it was making real small amounts, I should say. And so what I ended up doing is after the dust settles, I mean, I took this, and it wasn't really even a company. I was pouring glue from a bucket like this into smaller containers by hand out of my garage and making sales calls in one of the rooms in my house. And I had one guy working with me. And so what ends up happening is God spoke and gave me a vision. And what he told me was, he said, David, because I was sending out free samples of my glue and trying to get people's business. I was making cold calls all day. And so finally what ends up happening is I heard the Lord tell me, stop selling your glue. And I was like, what? That's what we do. Like,
it's what I have.
And so he's like, align yourself with the biggest companies in the turf industry and let their sales teams sell your glue. And so I was like, oh man. And so then I saw this picture, and it was a tire. It's like a wheel. And I saw the hand of God put a stick in it. And he went like this as he was telling me this. And he goes like this. And he goes, boom. And he goes, and watch it make money the rest of your life.
Put it in motion.
And so that's what I did, is I started calling the biggest companies in the industry, and I started focusing on them first. And what ended up happening is exactly what the Lord said. I didn't see how it was going to happen, but what ended up happening is these companies started to sell my product, and people within those companies started branching off and either starting their own companies or going to work with other companies, and they were always talking about my glue. And so what ended up happening was that kept on taking place throughout multiple states, right? And so then I started getting calls from other places wanting me to sell their turf. And so the Lord told me early on, like, because I had been to business school, that would be a conflict of interest. If I sell turf, then some companies are not going to want to buy my glue because they're going to see me as competition. And so I've always stayed out of that industry and kept separated. And so what I did was solely focus on exactly that, just my adhesive, not aligning with those. But I got this idea one time, and it had to have been Holy Spirit, but I'm like, I'm going to flip the script. Because I was getting calls all the time, especially from Chinese-based companies, because they were trying to penetrate the market and come into the States with their turf. And so what I did is this company was calling like 3 times a week, trying to get me to sell their turf. And so finally what I did is I started calling them. And I would cold call them and block my number and be like, hey, you guys got that glue, that green glue that everybody's talking about? I need a pallet of it. Oh, you guys don't have it? Oh, man, I think that XGS glue, that's what it is. Do you guys don't have that? No. And so then I'd wait, call 2 weeks later. Hey, I'm over here at a job site. I need 2 pallets of that green glue. Do you guys carry it? And so I would do that for like weeks at a time until the point where I finally got a call from their purchasing department. It was like, hey, do you guys manufacture that green glue? So essentially created a demand for my product.
So you went from selling meth, coke, weed, to now you sell glue. And now your glue company has exploded. God's favored it, God's blessed it. You went from government cheese to the place where God has blessed you immensely. You went from a place where I didn't have to a place where God has so provided for you that you choose to be a blessing everywhere you go now.
Amen.
And that's the goodness of God. You know, as we get ready to start bringing this to a conclusion, you and I, we've had so many great times and moments, you know, where we've spent together. But there was a time about 3 years ago, we decided to go to Cabo. And I'll never forget, you know, you told me you had never been fishing. I love fishing. And I remember telling you, you're gonna go to Cabo and you're gonna catch a marlin. And so we made a decision to go fishing.
Yeah, me, you, and Miss Juanita.
Yeah. But there were so many things that took place on this 6-7 hour boat ride. You know, share with everybody what God did for you that day. Because it was really a spiritual moment.
Yeah, it really was, because, you know, growing up without a father, I never had, like, even, you know, with 3 brothers and my mom working and stuff by then. And, I never had like my mom or my father show up for my soccer games, my varsity games, my college games to cheer me on. Or I never ever had any of that. And so that was something I always regretted not experiencing. And so I thought I would walk throughout life never experiencing a camping trip with my dad or go fishing or anything like that. So we set out, early in the morning. I didn't want to go because I'm not a morning person, but we set out like 5 in the morning or something like that, and we're out to sea. And I remember I'm just enjoying just the beauty of Cabo and where we're at. And I remember you telling me, like, if that pole yanks, you're going to be in the chair first. Like, you're going to go first. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I just remember, man, we were out there for a while. Miss Juanita was chumming the waters. But yeah, I remember when that pole went off and zzz, and I remember jumping up and being like, and I remember I jumped and I missed the seat. I was so, I jumped up to get in the seat, and and I remember as I was reeling in this fish and just battling with this fish, and all I could hear was you behind me and instructing me all what to do, and I could hear your voice, you got this, and now pull, now whine, and we're doing all this stuff, and I just remember when we caught that fish, and they brought it on the deck, and I remember this overwhelming feeling where I just began to weep. And I remember looking at you and you being like, what are you crying for? Like almost like this facial expression.
Like, we're celebrating right now. We're about to have marlin tacos.
And I'm crying, man. But and the reason why was because I thought I was gonna leave this life, leave this earth, never experiencing a father-son trip where there's a man behind you telling you, you got this. You got what it takes. And I remember in that moment being so thankful to God that here I am, 40-something years old, finally experiencing what this feels like. And I was just so thankful in that moment because I was like, man, God wasn't going to let me leave this place without letting me experience that. And so, yeah, it was such an experience that I had to, tattoo it on my back. I got a big marlin on my back.
Yeah, you were young in the sense of not knowing how to, we went and processed the fish, and you were so excited. You see the size of it, not realizing they're going to cut the head, and you still carry you got the sword, and so you got that at your beach house, and you have it set up. And I remember you were so excited. You told the captain, "Oh yeah, man, go ahead, take a piece." And that,
I know, like 20 pounds of marlin oil or something.
And I was like, and he's like, "You're like, just have this side," and I was like, "No, that's not what he means."
Yeah.
I had to, because he was gonna steal a big portion of your fish, and then you realized after we had it processed, you're like, whoa. And we had fish tacos, marlin tacos,
like a month or
for about
month and a half or something.
And we literally enjoyed it. I think one of the other great first that I could honestly share that I had with you was remembering the first time that you were going to preach, and you shared with me and you said, "Rob, this is the first time I'm going to preach." And, I remember saying, "I'm going to be there." And I changed my trip and I went and sat in your very first opportunity for you to share the word. And ever since then, I've been blessed, man. And I'm so thankful for everything that God has done in your life. You were a part of our first SOAR group, and maybe you could just speak into that, because when you came to SOAR, you didn't know anything about the prophetic.
Yeah, nothing at all. And honestly, I think it was, like I said, from the marriage retreat, it was a prophetic word that had really shifted not just my marriage, but my life. And so when that class had first come about and you're like, I think I'm going to start doing this, I was like, I want to be a part of that. And so, yeah, me and my wife for 3 years would drive out to Lake Forest and sit with you, and sometimes those classes would go hours. But I think like right around the end of the first semester, I remember like talking about like the prophetic atmosphere and then doing the activations. And what was amazing about it was, being able to be alongside you and you be like making the corrections. And then what I hear David saying is, and then helping us translate what you're seeing and what you're hearing into the prophetic word. And to have someone coach you through that while you're doing that. And we would talk about how this atmosphere carries. And so what would happen is I would get home and the atmosphere would still be there, and I'd be like, now I got the word for that guy. Now I know. And it would happen like that for me. And so I think the prophetic really began to hit me in a way where I wasn't just moving in it, but I started to live it. And then I started to understand like how to live prophetically. And I think that's really what's made the greatest difference in my life, was shifting from a prophetic gift to a prophetic lifestyle. You oftentimes hear people throw out this term spiritual father very loosely, and I don't. The relationship that I have with you has been cultivated over a number of years, where it has been a fathering, where I have been someone coaching me and doing what a father does. Oh. And in that, it's very easy for me to say a spiritual father, whereas I spent my life, because I didn't have a father, trying to get affirmation in a man. You know what I mean? But I never had a man take me in and say, I'll walk you through this. Okay. You know what I mean? And I feel like for that, especially when it came to the prophetic, that mattered. And so by the time we hit year 2, you were already calling me pastor. I'm like, oh, and he was, oh, that's another pastor. And then I remember you just telling me everything out of my mouth is prophetic. And so shortly after, we would get ordained. And I was like, man, and it is, what's crazy is, even when my pastor was like, the elder board wants to ordain you and your wife as associate pastors. I was like, what? And I remember calling my mom and be like, hey, Mom, like at church, they want to make me a pastor. They want to ordain me as a pastor. And my mom was like, what kind of church do you go to? Like,
still razzing you, man. Still razzing you.
But yeah, I mean, in all those years, man, I tell you that's the greatest thing that I think I learned, was how to live a prophetic lifestyle. Because now it's so easy now, especially in the midst of a storm or in hardships. I don't ever mind getting wet. I see it as a training ground. Yeah. I see it as God shaping and molding character into me. And I got to learn these lessons, because God is a loving Father, and He's wanting to teach in that manner so that I can grow into the things He's called me to. And so I'm so thankful, because for a long time, I've been blessed in such a way where I haven't really had to work. And it freed up a lot of time. And what I was doing was wasting that time doing things I shouldn't be doing. And what I began to realize is God's allowed me this lifestyle and this freedom, so I can not only be who I am and who I'm called to be, but so that I could serve others. And so I think that's really what pulled me into ministry. And I really enjoy helping others who come from a lifestyle like my own, and saying, if God did it for me, man, He could surely do it for you,
Yeah. Well, you definitely carry the story of a champion, the story of an overcomer, setbacks, comebacks, adversity, struggle, trial, but triumph. So when I listen to your testimony, I hear a testimony of triumph. A man that didn't believe for much, was just looking for a home. Now you own several. You're looking for family. Now you got a wife, 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. You are blessed to a place probably beyond your imagination. But it was what you desired. And out of hardships, out of tragedies, God has just formulated and formed and forged in you a wonderful man who carries a grace, who is changing lives. And even, though you graduated from the SOAR school, 4 or 5 years ago, our training is still continual. And I remember asking you, do you know why you do this, Pastor Tommy's church? And I said, do you know why you'll be worshiping and then you'll put your hands down, you'll walk to the front of the room and you begin to survey it? And they're like, no, but I do it all the time. And I remember sharing why. Do you remember why?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, because even in sitting in your SOAR class yesterday and hearing you talk about how God framed something, and it's crazy how the Spirit will quicken you to that. And now I'm sitting on the sides basically like, what are you showing me? And now I'm looking at background and foreground, and I'm looking deep within one's heart and saying, one of the things I really enjoy, because I had such a hard time with translating images into words, was one thing that was showed to me was to be able to ask what you're seeing, what does that have in common with the Holy Spirit? And that was so powerful for me. And so like when you make those connections and you see, like if I'm praying over someone and I see coffee bean, and I ask myself, well, what does that have to do with Holy Spirit? Because if I see, and I'm praying over someone and I see coffee bean, and that's for you, and Holy Spirit has commonalities with coffee bean, well, if Holy Spirit's in you, well, then you also have commonalities. And so that really helped me shift and be like, okay, and then in there I was able to be, I see you coming into a season where you're releasing a great aroma right now, where others are gravitating to you, where it's almost like a caffeine, where you begin to feel an energy because you're so on fire for the things of God. I see you growing right now. And so I began to move it in a way where I could now translate what I was seeing into a prophetic word. But I think, when I get up and it's like the Lord won't let me sit down. He's highlighting something to me, and it's unto a purpose. And so I think in that, God makes it real exciting and fun. So whether I'm serving in the healing room or whether I'm serving at church on the prayer line, I tend to flow in and out of from healing and prophetic. And somewhere in there, I'll get a word of knowledge or a word of wisdom.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to just look straight ahead at the camera, and I just want you to take a moment and share whatever God places in your heart, because I believe that someone listening needs to hear your story, and it's going to change their life when they listen. But I believe that there is a word hidden inside of you that's going to transform them. So just take a moment, look right at that camera, prophesy, do what you do, share from your heart that message to just grab hold of that one.
Well, I'll say this, that from a very young age, like I said, in practicing my autograph, and long before that, there was a still small voice in me that said I would be somebody. And I had to sit on that word in the times of my greatest trials and my greatest obstacles. And I had to feel like that voice was correct. Like, in fact, I would one day be someone. And I feel like I'm not the only one that has had that still small voice speak to them. But I would encourage anyone who maybe just received something little from this testimony that God will for surely use the foolish things of the world. And though I never thought it could be me, and I never thought I could live a life that I live today, God has brought me in such a way, placed all the right people, men, women, around me that would help me move into this place. And I just feel like for those who maybe feel like they're lost or don't have the guidance, that God will in fact do exactly that. If you're needing a father, he'll put a father figure around you. If you need to be loved, he'll in fact put the right woman in front of you. But it's up to you to really have to partner with that there is in fact a loving, kind dad called Abba who wants to bless you in such a way. And I feel like for me, because I've made so many poor choices in my life, that I just had to hit a place of accountability where I was going to be responsible for my own choices. I was going to be accountable for the decisions not only I had made, but the decisions that I was going to make. And so I want to encourage those who may be watching that you would begin to be intentional as far as the decisions you make. Because I really try to love well. That's, I think, the thing that I try to do most, because I think so many people, we evangelize in a way that maybe doesn't always have the impact that maybe it's intended. Like I said, that couple that pulled me into their home and required me to go to church with them, it didn't really give me a good taste for God, though their heart was probably in the right place. But I feel like the best way to evangelize is to love well. And so I really focus on that because people are so hard to love. I was that person. And so despite the people that I run into, or despite now the people that I encounter, I really try to do that. I try to just love extremely well from the place of how God sees things. And I feel like in doing that, God really honors that. And it allows me to be in a position where I can share something authentically or organically with someone without having to speak a scripture or without having to lead them into religion, but just simply have an open heart and see for yourself. And so I find myself in a place now where I encourage people to be around others who are fruitful in areas you would like to be fruitful. Because when fruit hangs low, it has an accessibility where you can just grab a hold of it and taste and see that it's good. And so if there's anything that I can encourage anyone with, if there's anything that I had to say, would be that Love well, learn to love yourself well, and learn to love others well. And in that, you will find wealth, you will find joy, you will find strength, and God will place all those around you because you're a good aroma. And I believe that's really the heart of God, to bring his children back into the family where they don't feel judged, where they don't feel like they're not enough, but in fact, they feel accepted and treasured. And I think that's the one thing that I've learned from my wife that I've always held on to is my wife is always like, I'm God's favorite. And so if you could renew your mind into anything, renew it into that. Begin to feel and identify yourself as God's favorite. Because the Bible says we would not live by how we feel or by what we see, but by every word that come from the mouth of God. And so God says that about you and I, that he calls us beloved. He cherishes us. And he truly sees us as the apple of his eye, and he's proud of us. And so when you feel the love of a father like that, you can't help but want to honor him with a life of obedience and servitude. And so if there's one thing I could encourage, it would be that.
I appreciate that so much, man. Well, David Frondarina, I want to say thank you for sharing your story. I believe that many hearts will be touched, and even greater, many lives will be changed. Amen. Thank you, my friend.